I feel like scamming has gotten so much more heightened in the last couple of years. It's becoming less of a use your common sense to avoid and now just assume that everyone is going to scam you.
I didn't really think property was a problem. I don't know how many properties are sold in a year, but if they can tap 1% of that, it's a pretty big market.
How would you feel if more than $100,000 of your hard-earned money was taken by a property scammer? Welcome to Real Talk, realestate.com.au's property news podcast. It's real questions, real experts and real insights. And today we're talking about property scams. In Australia, property scams rose 25% from 2021 to 2022, with losses up 186% to 1.8 million. This proves that scammers are making a real buck from unsuspecting Aussies. We'll unpack how it's happening, the signs to look out for, and some of the ways that you can protect yourself from falling victim. Here's what Aussies think about the whole thing.
We pay by a BSB and account number. Sadly, I think there is an opportunity for easy targets in that process.
Call me old-fashioned, but I think I'd probably rather go to a bank.
I can't imagine anyone would be naive enough to do that. I think they've just got to be aware of the risk.
Joining me today is Aaron Wischusen, Senior Product Manager at realestate.com.au, who has his finger on the pulse of property security issues, and Kristen Porter, Founder and Legal Strategist at the Real Estate Agents Lawyers. Thanks for joining me. This is a seriously scary topic and one that's happening to more and more Aussies, unfortunately. Kristen, what are the most common types of property scams that we're seeing in the market at the moment?
Fraudsters, they're getting more sophisticated and they're able to intercept emails between agents and their clients and also agents, conveyancers and their clients. So the property scams that we are seeing the most of are unsuspecting, hardworking people paying money to a trust account, either a real estate agent trust account or a solicitor or conveyancer's trust account, and assuming that the money is getting there. What these scammers are doing are intercepting emails and changing the bank account details in those instructions in the emails so that these people will then pay money to the scammer's account, whereas everyone's thinking it's safely going into a trust account.
Now, Aaron, you specialise in the rental market. Are there any additional scams in renting that are concerning you?
Although rare, on sites like realestate.com.au, we have seen some fake listing scams. And typically this is when a listing is put up where the person or the perpetrator doesn't have authority or even access to this property. The goal for them is to get someone to pay in advance for that property, or in some cases, just to collect their personal information.
I'm seeing rental scams happen in the wider market. So on places like Facebook Marketplace and Gumtree, they might take a listing from our site and just put it up on Facebook for $100 less. Is that a real concern?
It is. And I think that's why it's difficult for people to detect rental scams, is because they can just look like any other property. I think there are some telltale signs that people can use when they're looking at listings. If something looks too good to be true, it most likely is. Typically look at what is being offered. If it's well below market price and if the property looks amazing, then there's probably some red flags there. Another good example is the person will never want to meet you and they probably won't offer for you to inspect that property because they don't have access.
How does realestate.com.au respond to rental scams?
Scams on realestate.com.au are incredibly rare. And the reason for this is the majority of the listings on our site are placed there by professional and accredited real estate agencies where they have an existing relationship with that owner. Obviously, the risk is never zero. And so we do have our own systems and processes in place to prevent, detect and deal with fraud. A good example is in our private landlord listing business where we sell rental advertising products direct to self-managed owners. We have a team that checks every single listing before it goes live, and they have a range of data as well as ownership documents that they get to cite before they allow that listing to go live.
Kristen, I want to move back to what you were speaking about before about conveyancing fraud. How in detail does it actually work?
They essentially get the emails that are supposed to be going to you, they intercept them, they insert their own bank account details. So it looks like your trusted lawyer is telling you, please pay your big deposit into my trust account. And it looks like a trustworthy communication because it's still coming from that email address of your lawyer. What reputable agents and solicitors and conveyancers are doing is they will always follow you up with a phone call. They will never ask you to transfer money just based off an email or a text message. The one thing that you can do to make sure that you are talking to the right person is independently source the phone number for your lawyer, for example.
We did actually speak to one woman who almost did exactly that by sending a very, very, very large housing deposit to a scammer.
I was almost scammed out of a lot of money when I was settling on my home. I was actually at the bank and about to transfer the money, and the bank said to me, "Are you sure this is the right account?" I had all the documentation from my conveyancer, whom I've dealt with for many, many years and had several property transactions. So I had no reason whatsoever to even query the information. And I said, yes, 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 several times. And then I finally said, just a minute, I'm just going to ring my conveyancer and check. When I rang and checked, the bank account details that were on the form were incorrect. It was a scam. They'd actually they'd intercepted all of the documentation online, had just imitated the conveyancer and emailed the form to me, and had all the details of their own bank account.
There is one guy actually who wasn't as lucky as her, and this comes out of New South Wales. Now, in 2 transfers, he lost $274,000. And how this happened was that emails from his conveyancer got intercepted and the invoice details were changed. Kristen, you did mention checking email signatures, checking phone numbers, all of that stuff. But how can consumers and conveyancers protect themselves from this type of scam?
On the business side, so the conveyancers and the solicitors, obviously having really strong processes in place and training your team, because whilst as the owner or the lawyer, you might be completely across all of these things, it's not necessarily that your receptionist is or your conveyancing clerk. Now, in relation to consumers, if people are using pressure tactics or something so urgent that it has to be done this very, very second, that's often a really big red flag. Because in property transactions, we know generally there is time. Always take that step back, take a breath, and just check all of the details.
That is good advice from the buying market with conveyances and things, but renters aren't dealing with that sort of stuff. So, Aaron, where do you think that consumers are most vulnerable? What part of the process?
I think it would be around that advertisement. I think one of the key things is always ask for an inspection. Never pay for something that you haven't seen, and never pay anything to someone you've never met. And I think that's probably the biggest thing here. If someone's giving you a story of why they can't meet, I think that's like instant red flags. You should walk away from that.
Kristen, what are your thoughts on that?
In relation to the buying and selling of property, I find it's at the other end. So it's more at the settlement end. I think that people are more vulnerable. Deal fatigue has set in, and that's where we're seeing a lot more fraud and scams happening because those pressure tactics are being used, the accounts are being intercepted, and that's where it can go very wrong at that end as well.
I'm interested in whose job it is to protect the public from these scams. Who do you think is responsible for this?
At the end of the day, we are the only people that will look out for ourselves. So I think that needs to be a starting point, that we educate ourselves, so we learn about these scams and what to do about them. But also as business owners too, we should be wanting to protect our consumers. So as lawyers and conveyancers, as agents, there is a great deal of responsibility on us as well to make sure that we have those systems and those checks and balances in place.
Aaron, what do you think about that?
I think there's responsibility on the platforms. Consumer protection is at the top of our list. But I also agree that education is the best and last line of defense. Technology can only do so much and scammers will evolve. But if you're educated on how to detect and avoid scams and how to proceed safely, I think that's the best outcome.
So, Kristen, apart from the steps we've already spoken about, do you have any other safety tips that people can use to protect their own selves?
When it comes to using lawyers, conveyancers and agents, there are mechanisms that you can check to make sure those people are legitimate. We're all registered with different bodies. Lawyers especially are registered with their law societies and have registration numbers. Same with agents. We all have registration numbers that you can check, mostly with your local fair trading or law societies. So that's one thing I think that we haven't spoken about today that a consumer can do to make sure they are using the right advisors so they don't get caught up in one of those advisor type scams.
Aaron, do you have any other tips to add?
make sure that they're using a platform that's based in Australia, has a privacy policy. And then if the platform you're using, say it's flatmates.com.au, offers an on-site messaging system, try and stay within that for as long as possible because it allows you to protect your identity. But it also means that if something does go wrong, that interaction can be observed by the platform and that person potentially can be removed. And for example, on flatmates.com.au, if a fraudulent listing is detected, that team immediately, or in fact the system, once that listing has been banned, will send an immediate message to any single person who's contacted that listing. If you take everything offline straight away, you lose that ability to then be alerted if there is an issue. Although we have all these amazing systems and a moderation team in place to detect fraud, sometimes it comes from within the community. And as we said earlier, listings, they can look very legitimate. And, we don't have the signals to detect that was fraudulent, but someone's interaction with that person might say, hey, there's something wrong here, and they can flag that to our team. And then our team can then act on behalf of the community and remove that and warn everyone else who's been in contact.
Before I started researching this episode, I honestly had no idea how frightening property scams were because it's just not something we talk about day to day, especially not here in the office at realestate.com.au. And it's something that is a newer form of scamming, and it almost feels like you have to have your wits about you, not just in property, but in about everything. But it is good to know that realestate.com.au is actually going to great lengths to protect Australians, as well as what we can do to stay safe ourselves. So I hope that listeners have learned as much as me. And it seems like the biggest piece of advice is don't just double, triple check, but quadruple check the details. Go through phone calls, go through emails, go through signatures, do your online research. And if you notice something fishy, raise the alarm because, like we just discovered before, help yourself and help others. So thank you both so much for joining me. It's been pretty eye-opening. Thanks for joining me. This has been Real Talk. For your weekly fix, please follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and tune in next time for more real questions, news and insights on the topics that matter most from realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. All information provided is general advice and opinion based on current market conditions. These opinions should not be treated as investment advice. Always obtain advice based on your individual circumstances.
Real Talk acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, air and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present.